my shots were the first shots that were fired at the Reserve Center. And they alerted the Marines on the other side of the building that something was going on. My sailors also, when they heard my shots, some of them started running out of the building to alert the Marines and also to get out of the building.
Welcome back. I'm T.D. Smyers, and this is No Cliches. Hello and welcome to No Cliches, companion podcast to my coaching, consulting, and leadership writing at A Bold Leader. I'm T.D. Smyers, and I've been in leadership my whole life, from taking point in small teams to command of military troops to multiple roles as a CEO. And if this life in leadership has taught me anything, it's that leading is more art than science. I call this No Cliches because we'll go well beyond the basics here, leaving behind the LinkedIn infographics to dive headfirst into some of the toughest situations a leader can face. Through stories and interviews, you'll get a behind-the-scenes look at leadership truths that always apply, no matter what industry or sector you're in. This is a no-holds-barred leadership conversation, so strap in. In your worst nightmares, you'll likely never have to defend your office against an armed terrorist. My guest today, however, had to do exactly that. It was the last full day of Ramadan when terrorist Muhammad Youssef Abdulazeez opened fire on a Chattanooga recruiting center, then drove 7 miles to the Navy Operational Support Center, rammed his vehicle through the gate, and approached the headquarters building wearing tactical gear and armed with an AK-74 semi-automatic rifle. Inside, the center's commanding officer, Lieutenant Commander Tim White, rose from his desk. Observing the approaching terrorist through his office window, White oriented himself to the emerging threat, decided to defend his troops, reached into a drawer for his personal sidearm and acted, firing on Abdulazeez from the window. The first to engage the terrorist, White's gunfire alerted those inside the center to the impending danger, giving most the opportunity to escape unharmed. Before Abdulazeez was ultimately stopped, however, he would kill 5 and wound 2. White was a hero to many, but his Navy career from that point forward was anything but guaranteed. Navy regulations prohibited personal firearms on installations, but White, recognizing an imminent threat to his team that the chain of command failed to address, reached outside the rule books to display bold leadership that saved lives. I reached out to Tim for an interview months ago, but the Navy wouldn't allow it. Now retired as of July 1st at the rank of commander after 20 years of honorable commissioned service, Tim joins me on No Cliches to present the story in his own words. And Tim White, welcome to No Cliches, man. It's good to have you on.
Thanks, TD. Thanks for inviting me. It's good to be with you.
Yeah, well, I've been anticipating this for a while, getting you on here. Your story back in 2015 was actually what inspired the subject matter of what would become A Bold Leader, leadership in circumstances where the rules don't apply or the rules are anachronistic. So when I read about your story, I thought it was a good fit for that. And so I actually started writing a blog post back then that never made print because I was waiting to see what happened so that'd be, kind of the rest of the story. And so that was 2015. So here we are 7 years later, finally getting a chance to open this up. You are a graduate of the #1 public school in the country. Don't believe me. It's on U.S. News. There's a link. There's a link at aboldleader.com. Go Navy.
Go Navy.
Go, yeah, beat Army. So walk us a little bit, Tim, through your career. Tell us a little bit about what you did. You're a helicopter pilot, and then we'll pick up with the events that happened in Chattanooga. But tell us a little bit about yourself and your Navy history.
Okay. Well, again, thanks for having me on, TD. I grew up in Georgia, then went to the Naval Academy in 1998. Graduated in 2002, actually met my wife there at the Naval Academy, and we got married right after graduation. And I was a sailing instructor as a new ensign until I went to flight school, and then got winged as a naval aviator flying helicopters in 2004, and was stationed in Guam flying helicopters in the South Pacific and Indian Ocean and South China Sea. And one of my first deployments was to Indonesia. There was a tsunami that hit Indonesia and Thailand and that part of the world in 2004, and I
Yeah.
got to do something that I knew was special then, but I think I had visions of maybe doing that again in my naval career, but never did anything like that again. It was amazing to be able to help the people of Banda Aceh and the people of Indonesia. Finished up my tour in Guam in 2007, then was a flight instructor at Whiting Field flying T-34s for a tour. Went back to Guam where I was a boat det OIC, and went back to NAS Whiting Field to be a T6 flight instructor. And my vision was that I would be in the cockpit for the rest of my career. But the Navy had other plans for me and sent me to Chattanooga in 2015 to be the CO of a reserve center. And so in May of 2015, I took command of the Reserve Center, and the next week I hosted the CNO, who at the time was Admiral Greenert, for the Armed Forces Day Parade. And it was a great opportunity to get to meet him and just talk to him a little bit. And I thought, well, I'll probably never see him again. And then,
well, you did.
Yeah, I did. A couple of months, about a month and a half later, a terrorist attacked the recruiting offices in Chattanooga. That was not his main target. He attacked that office first, and then drove to the reserve center, crashed through our gate, and attacked my reserve center, and mortally wounded one of my sailors and murdered 4 Marines. And that kind of started a very busy tour. I thought that my tour in Chattanooga was going to be kind of relaxing, but it was a very busy tour, largely because of that.
I wanted you to walk through that because, so here's a Georgia boy, goes to the Naval Academy, becomes a helicopter pilot operationally, comes back and does an instructor tour, which is indicative of your capabilities that you displayed in the aircraft. So you got an instructor tour under your belt, went back, did another sea tour. You wound up, because nobody can stay in the cockpit forever, right? Because it's just like getting promoted out into management when you're in the civilian sector, in the private sector. You got put into management, and you were going to be in charge of this Navy Operational Support Center in Chattanooga, Tennessee. And I mean, everybody can understand Chattanooga, Tennessee, beautiful location on the Tennessee River there. It's going to be kind of a low-key way to move into a command tour. And I say command is the pinnacle of a Navy officer's career, right? Would you agree?
Oh, absolutely.
President of the United States, what he reposes in you when you're commissioned as an officer, that special trust and confidence, is really something that you feel in command, and you feel the weight of that and the heaviness of that and the headiness of that. So I'm with you when I hear you describe your movement into Chattanooga. And it's pretty cool too, right? When you get there, you get to host the chief of naval operations, the head sailor there in your command. And so you had a great start. Now, when you start talking about the events of July 16th, there's some setup there. When you engaged this terrorist, you engaged him with your personal sidearm. So a lot of folks that don't have military experience, they'll ask questions like, well, it's a military base. Doesn't everybody carry a weapon? Right? Why didn't somebody take him out? Why didn't somebody take the shooter out? Doesn't everybody carry a weapon on the base? Walk us a little bit through the rules, the policies the Navy has on personal sidearms, how that's different than the weapons that are carried by security forces, that kind of thing.
Okay. So at that time, personal weapons were not allowed on any federal property. And since then, that has changed somewhat. The Secretary of Defense has authorized the service secretaries, which like the Secretary of the Navy, Secretary of the Air Force, Secretary of the Army, to implement that program where service members may bring their personal weapons on federal property on military bases. But typically at that time, the only people that were carrying weapons were security force sailors, and whether it's Army security forces or Air Force or Navy security forces, and everybody else was unarmed. And thankfully that's changed. But right before the attack in Chattanooga, there was a scare on the Navy Yard. You probably remember that there was an active shooter on the Navy Yard years ago. killed quite a few people. And then right before the 2015 attack in Chattanooga, there was a scare, a false alarm that people thought there was an active shooter, but there was a reporter that was interviewing a Navy lieutenant commander on the sidewalk outside of the Navy Yard, and she said, well, it seems odd that there'd be an active shooter on the Navy Yard, because certainly after the active shooter event years ago, there are a lot of people carrying now, right? Like a lot of service members are carrying. And he said, oh no, nobody carries on the Navy Yard. And I saw that live as it was happening, and I was thinking, oh, that's one of our policies in the Navy is we don't discuss force protection with the public. We don't discuss it on the media. We don't discuss it at all on social media or anything. But I was thinking that now that he said, oh no, nobody carries a weapon on these military bases, that removed that question in our potential adversaries' minds. And I had a feeling that we were going to see another active shooter, but I was hoping it wouldn't be where I was in Chattanooga.
Yeah, sure. And so you're seeing these things happen just as you're getting orders into Chattanooga.
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay, so you've arrived there. There's been this scare. There's been this incident at the Navy Yard. You brought a personal firearm onto the installation, and obviously you knew that the policy prohibited that, right? So you made some decision to do that. These factors, and were there any other factors that played into it? What was going through your head when you decided to take your sidearm with you?
Well, as I was preparing to go to Chattanooga, at that time, ISIS was pretty active, and they and Al Qaeda and other terrorist organizations had been making a lot of threats towards military service members, first responders, their families, and they were calling on their followers to attack service members and their families at their homes. And there were reports of Middle Eastern males approaching spouses of like National Guardsmen who are deployed in, I think it was Ohio, and saying, we know where you live, we know where your husband is, and we're watching you. There were also force protection directives that were coming out as a result of some of these threats, directing commands and bases to try to prevent attacks. And so I was seeing all these things, and when I took command, I was looking at those directives and seeing all the things that I was required to do, and my sailors didn't have any training on how to implement a lot of those directives, like vehicle inspections and that kind of thing. Thankfully, I had some training because of my previous experience at the Maritime Expeditionary Security Squadron, and I did some training with that and trained some of my sailors on how to do those things. But it seemed like the Department of Defense was taking those threats pretty seriously, and I was definitely taking those threats seriously. And also the Navy regulations for the chapter that talks about commanding officers and their responsibilities mention specifically that the commanding officer is responsible to defend his people and his property from acts of terrorism. I think that the Navy gives very special authorities to commanding officers that not all other services necessarily give, because we're kind of modeled for commanding officers taking ships over the horizon away from direct supervision and that special
authority.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's one of the things that makes being a commanding officer in the naval service so awesome is that special trust and confidence, like you mentioned. And I took that responsibility to defend my sailors and the Marines there and my facility against terrorism seriously, and I was trying to implement multiple things to try to make us a harder target. And I was also requesting some things to make us a harder target. The Marines that were a tenant command of mine, they had an armory. They were trained in using firearms, and they would often go to the range, and they would offer to let us come along so that we could be qualled and stand armed watches. I asked my boss if we could do that, and he said, oh, absolutely not. We're not going to do that. We're not going to arm our sailors. I sort of felt like I didn't have what I needed to keep my sailors safe. And I knew that if I brought a weapon to work, and if I was if it was discovered that I had a weapon, that likely my career would be over. At the same time, I looked at the Navy regs and saw that I'm responsible to protect my sailors from acts of terrorism. And I looked at the federal regulation that prevented bringing personal firearms onto federal property, and it had a clause in there that said, unless otherwise authorized. So I took the Navy regulations and I said, well, I think that the Navy regulations are authorizing me to do what it takes to protect my sailors from acts of terrorism. And so I authorized myself, so to
You
speak.
authorized with the commanding officer's authority, you authorized yourself. But you draw a great example of things that commanders throughout the services struggle with, and the things like the unfunded mandates, right? Where you're given this accountability to look after the protection of, in your case, your sailors and Marines. But oftentimes you're not provided the resources to do it at the level that you feel is safe, especially in an emerging threat environment like you're describing, right? Where you've got heightened tensions, you've got intel coming in telling you that things could be risky. So you made efforts within Navy protocols to get those defenses beefed up, right? You
Yes.
made those requests as you just described, and then made the very creative move of authorizing yourself to bring your firearm. And, I can't help, Tim, but when I listen to you talk about it, when you're talking about it, you knew that if it was discovered that you had brought your personal sidearm to the office, to the facility, that it would end your career. You probably weren't thinking at that point that the fact that you had that sidearm was about to become international news.
I kind of assumed that I was going to get, well, I don't necessarily consider myself a politically correct type of Navy officer. I try to be very sensitive to things. I'm a man of faith. I try to be loving in what I do, but I also am a man of principle, and I know that sometimes there are principles that I'm not willing to compromise on. And I believed that I was probably going to get fired from being a CO anyway. I think that's a lot of COs when they take the seat, they say, well, I'm probably going to get fired from this, because you see it in the news pretty often. It's not that I had like the type of mentality that I wasn't going to try to do my best. I was trying to do my best in everything in every way possible.
Sure.
But it was more important to me to do what was right, what I could live with myself in the future, knowing that I have to look at myself in the mirror every day. I would not be able to look at myself in the mirror if I didn't do everything possible to keep my sailors safe, and then fail to do so, and then somebody gets hurt.
Well, you did what you saw as your duty.
Yeah, that's correct.
This is something too. I just, for maybe the sake of some folks that are listening to this, wondering that, trying to picture you as some Georgia cowboy with a holster strapped on. You have been trained in the use of firearms in your official Navy capacity.
Yeah, that's correct. Actually, got quite a bit of training at the Maritime Expeditionary Security Squadron. There's a course called the Expeditionary Combat Skills Course in Gulfport, Mississippi, and it lasts about a month long. And I was comfortable with firearms growing up. We had firearms, and I was comfortable shooting and enjoyed that. And then got quite a bit of experience at the Expeditionary Combat Skills course, moving and shooting. But while I was at the Naval Academy, I did training with the Marines and some training with the SEAL instructors there. And some of that included firearms training.
So
And
your training in this space then is, and I'm not just saying this space in terms of firearms, but this space in terms of force security and expeditionary security. I mean, this is something that was a thread running through your career for some time.
yes.
So this is interesting because some people would say that you were extremely well prepared to make this very difficult call, make this judgment call, the one you just walked us through, that led you to being able to defend your folks that day. If I can kind of turn us back to that day in Chattanooga, when you're in your office and you see from your office window your attacker approaching the front door of your facility. Can you walk us through your thoughts as that happened? What was going on? What caught your attention? Why were you looking, and what did you subsequently do?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'll give you some more background information because I think it's applicable to kind of my thought process that I went through
Great.
that morning. There's another reserve center in Knoxville, so it's about an hour and a half away from Chattanooga, and they were preparing for their command assessment and were looking for some help to get their programs ready. And I kind of wanted to get my sailors out of the office. I kind of wanted to get out of the office too and go see their reserve center. And a good friend of mine was the CO of that reserve center. And so we had planned that trip for July 16th. And I was planning on going with my sailors and making it kind of a field trip. But there was something that went out at our house. Our AC unit went out at our house, and there was a technician that was supposed to come by, and I didn't want to be in a different town when a technician was at our house with my wife and children. So I decided to stay back. But also, right before I woke up that morning, the morning of July 16th, I had a very vivid dream. And TD, I'm not a huge dream person. I don't think that I get revelations from straight from God. But this in this dream, I was talking to a bearded jihadist, and there was a group of jihadists behind him. He was holding a weapon, and the big group were holding weapons. And I said, "You're an American, and I'm an American. So we should be able to work through our differences rather than trying to kill each other, right?" And he said no, and he was going to try to kill me and my family. And then my alarm went off right then. That dream I didn't think that necessarily I was going to be attacked by a jihadist, but I was very troubled about all of the things that we had talked about with the threats and the security measures that I was trying to take to keep my sailors safe.
Sure.
And also it was during a time not a whole lot unlike today, when we see a lot of division in our nation, and where Americans are at the throats of other Americans rather than being on each other's teams, and trying to work together towards a solution. And that was troubling to me as well. But that the dream definitely put me on my toes, put me on edge all
Oh, yeah.
morning. And so I went to work. My sailors left to go to Knoxville. I was sitting at my desk and kind of playing through the different scenarios that could happen, whether it was a vehicle-borne explosive device, or person with an explosive device, or an active shooter. And in the aviation community, we talk about chair flying. We will do simulators where we practice emergency procedures, and with our chair flying, just kind of sitting in the chair, imagining bad events happening in the cockpit and how we would handle them, so that when the bad event does happen, or if it happens, then we're spring-loaded to react rather than trying to decide what we're going to do at that time. And I was kind of playing through those scenarios in my mind, and my window was open, and I was enjoying the fresh air, and the reserve center is in a river park. It's very beautiful and scenic. And I heard screeching tires and a crash. And I thought, that's odd that would happen, because we're in a river park and the speed limit's so low and there are speed bumps. I don't know how anybody could get in a wreck. So initially, I just thought it was a wreck. And I couldn't see our gate from, so I got up from my desk and went around to the other side of my office so I could see maybe what had happened. And as I got up from my desk, one of my sailors, actually as Petty Officer Randall Smith, ran into my office. He said, "Sir, somebody just crashed through the gate. What do we do?" I told him to go call the police, and I saw him and a couple of sailors that were with him. They were reservists drilling there that day. They followed him out to where his office was. It was back inside the building, so not there in the main space. And then I went to the other side of my desk where my weapon was. And I pulled out my weapon and an extra magazine, and started to go back towards the other side of my office. And as I stood up, I saw the terrorist outside my window running down the sidewalk towards the entrance of the building. He was wearing a ball cap, a load-bearing vest that was very full. I thought that it was packed with explosives. It turns out it was packed with, it was double stuffed with magazines, and he was holding an assault rifle. And in my training, we talk about the threat triangle, which somebody is a threat that you can engage with lethal force if they have the intent to do you harm, the opportunity to do you harm, and the capability. And he demonstrated that he had the intent by crashing through the gate. He had the capability because he had those weapons, and he had the opportunity because he was now inside our fence line, and there was really nothing to keep him from us. And so I raised my weapon and shot at him as many times as I could, as quickly as I could, until I couldn't see him anymore, until he was out of my range of view.
You shot at him. You pretty much emptied your magazine into him, at least until you couldn't see him anymore. Did you stop him?
I did not. I really expected him to turn towards me and start shooting at me, but he kept running. And I was shooting through very thick glass, like storm glass, and I knew that has a pretty significant effect on the ballistics of rounds as they pass through the glass, whether it's thick glass or even thin glass. And but he just kept running, and I thought, wow, if he didn't try to engage me, he's trying to get in the building to try to detonate himself inside the building. And so he kept running. I went to my door to see if my sailors were there. It looked like they were not in that main office anymore and were back towards the ops office where Petty Officer Smith worked. So I closed my door and then went back to the window to see if there were any other attackers coming or if there was law enforcement. I didn't see anybody. And at that time, I could also hear the terrorist shooting. It sounded like he was using an automatic rifle, but it was not automatic. It was just semi-automatic. He was just shooting very quickly. And my pistol was loud when I was shooting in my office, but a pistol compared to a rifle, I mean, the rifle sounded like a cannon and mine like a cap gun. And I don't know if you've ever seen the movie We Were Soldiers with Mel Gibson.
Yeah.
There's a young platoon commander in that movie that is depicted as being real gung-ho. He's super motivated. In training, he was real aggressive. And then when I think he was the first platoon to make it into the LZ in Vietnam, and they were inserted by helicopter, and he was supposed to secure the LZ for the other platoons to come in. And they took fire, and instead of securing that LZ, he took his platoon into the jungle pursuing those attackers, and ended up getting all but I think 2 of his platoon members killed, including himself. And he said, as he was dying, he said, "I'm just glad that I could give my life for my country." But in the movie, it's depicted as he was very unwise in the way that he was pursuing the enemy, and because of his bad choices, he caused a great loss of life. And that's kind of been me throughout my life at the academy, and when we have to take boxing, and as a boxer and as a wrestler, I was always really aggressive. And the boxing coach, I was able to test out of my boxing class because I guess I did well enough, but the coach said, you can box aggressively, but be smarter about it so that you're not taking a bunch of punches to the face, which I was. I was kind of taking my opponent head on and getting a lot of punches in on him, and he was getting a lot of punches on me, whereas if I could be aggressive and smart about it, then I wouldn't have to take so many punches to the face. And I was thinking about all those things as I went back to my window and thinking, what can I do that would be maybe aggressive, but how can I be a part of the solution to this? We obviously have an active shooter. He's probably going to detonate himself. The Chattanooga Police Department believed that he was going to detonate himself, and have reason to believe that he had plans to do so and plans to detonate his vehicle, but didn't get the equipment, or things just didn't work out for that. So in my mind, I'm trying to think, how can I be a solution to the problem rather than add to it? And I decided I needed to get out of the building and try to get help from the police. So I jumped on top of my desk. My window was partially open, but not open all the way. And I'm a pretty big guy. I weigh about 220, and I like to work out and like to exercise. And I was going to kick that window open so that I could get out quickly. And I kicked it several times as hard as I could, and it did not open. And I thought, great, I'm going to die here because I didn't open it all the way. Turns out that I believe that there are several things that God used to preserve life that day. Unfortunately, 5 people died as a result or 6 people, including the terrorist. But it could have been a lot worse. And if I would have been able to go through that window right away, I think I would have been shot by the terrorist, because initially he was standing outside of the building shooting into our storefront area, assuming that the doors were locked. If I would have been able to get out right away, I think he would have seen me jump out of the window and engaged me.
Your initial firing on the terrorist,
Mm-hmm.
I've heard accounts that those gunshots alerted people inside that there was something going on and enabled a large part of the team to escape. Is that an accurate assessment?
Yeah, that's true. My shots were the first shots that were fired at the Reserve Center, and they alerted the Marines on the other side of the building that something was going on, and so they started getting out of the building or sheltering. And my sailors also, when they heard my shots, some of them started running out of the building to alert the Marines and also to get out of the building. I tried to kick my window open, couldn't get it open by kicking it, so I reached down and cranked it open and jumped out of my window and ran to the front gate. And as I got to the front gate, I could see that there was a Chattanooga police officer that was already there. And so I said, "There's an active shooter in the building. I saw him. It's a Middle Eastern male." And I kind of thought that he was going to say, "Okay, let's go get him." And I also told him, and I shot at him. And he said, "Wait behind my car. I'm waiting for backup." And it turns out that this police officer, Officer Sean O'Brien, who's now a good friend of mine, he actually was going to respond to the first attack where the terrorists shot up the recruiting center. And as he was heading towards that first scene, he could see the terrorist car coming down the highway. And he was actually going down that suicide lane and kicking up a lot of dust. And thankfully, he was going really fast and got the attention of Officer O'Brien. He turned around, followed him into the river park. And as the terrorist turned into the river park, Officer O'Brien said he knew exactly where he was going and what was happening. And he saw him crash through the gate, but he kept his distance because he thought that the terrorist was going to detonate his vehicle, which he had planned on doing, but didn't end up detonating. He didn't have the equipment. So then I wait behind his car. I see the police officers arriving in force just seconds later, but it actually took 11 minutes for the police officers to be able to stop Abdulazeez. So the terrorists went into the Navy Reserve Center, went right. The Marine Corps side was on the left, the Navy side was on the right. He went into the Navy side first. That's where he shot and mortally wounded Petty Officer Smith. As he was reloading, the Marines on the other side of the building started getting out of the building, and he chased them out of the building and shooting multiple magazines worth of rounds, and then exited the building where the Marines were jumping over the fence to get away. And that's where he murdered the 4 Marines that were killed. He went into the motor pool area where he was chasing some Marines, and that's when the Chattanooga police officers engaged and killed the terrorist in the motor pool. From the time that he crashed through the gate to the time that I fired my first shots were probably about 10 seconds or less, but it took about 11 minutes from the time that he crashed through the gate to the time that he was stopped. And that's a pretty amazing amount of time, a pretty short amount of time based upon what responses to crimes and active shooters normally takes. But 11 minutes is a very long time to have to wait for an active shooter to be stopped. And a lot of damage was done. 5 lives were lost, and many lives were changed forever because of it.
I don't think anybody listening here can even imagine what was going through your head at the time as these events were transpiring right before your eyes, and you were dealing with the aftermath of the very difficult calls that would have to be made to those the families of those who were lost. Everything that your command responsibilities weighed on you. You were earning your pay that day, right, brother?
Yes.
a lot of people looked into all this. The Navy did a command investigation, and the official findings are public record. There's actually a link for those at aboleader.com. The official findings stated that force protection measures employed by Navy commanders at all levels, and this is a quote, must be oriented and adapted to unique mission requirements, emerging threats, and local vulnerabilities. It sounds like in the official findings that the Navy was agreeing that we need to be able to give commanders the tools, the flexibility to be able to respond to things like local vulnerabilities, things unique to their situation. The Navy changed things as a result of the attack on your command, didn't they? What happened?
Yeah, they changed a lot of things. Right after the attack, the Navy Reserve decided that they wanted to implement an armed watchstander program, and they stood up this program that included shipping out weapons to off installation reserve centers, safes, ammunition, getting sailors trained up on being armed watchstanders, and even activating some reservists that were law enforcement officers as civilians so that they could help implement those programs, and also implemented a security upgrade for the off installation reserve centers. And they sent out survey teams to all the off installation reserve centers and looked at their specific vulnerabilities, things that really should be changed to make those facilities more secure. Some of the facilities, they decided we can't make this more secure. It's not worth the investment, and they closed those facilities and moved the reserve centers onto bases that were close by. And the other ones, Chattanooga being the first, received security upgrades that included ram-proof gates, vehicle ram-resistant fencing, and building entry control cameras. Some of the facilities received automated mass notification systems. Chattanooga got ballistic and blast glass throughout the facility. And so those upgrades were very significant, and with the purpose of protecting our most valuable resource, which is our Navy sailors and civilians and reservists, the people that need to be that we treasure and that we want to protect.
Looking back on all of it now, 7 years ago, do you have any regrets about that day? What might you have done differently, or what are your thoughts?
Yeah, some of the things that the Navy faulted me for were procedural or programmatic, I'm sorry. So we're required to have documents between like memorandums of understanding or agreement with local law enforcement agencies, just to show that we're talking with those other agencies. And if we hold training with our staff members, recording that training, recording lessons learned, if we hold drills. And so I was talking about force protection measures and procedures, what we would do if we had an active shooter or vehicle-borne IED or somebody rams the gate, almost daily with my sailors, but I didn't record it. And I was meeting with the park rangers and working on meeting with the local police department, but I didn't record those meetings. I didn't have an official memorandum of understanding or agreement. And so those are the things that the investigation faulted me for. But with regard to my actions,
those are administrative.
Yeah.
Right.
And they said if those things would have been in place, if I would have had all the documentation, it wouldn't have changed the outcome. And they did say that my actions on July 16th were life-saving, and that it put the terrorist on his heels. He wasn't as aggressive as he likely would have been. He was dropping magazines, making mistakes, and he was looking for the person that was shooting at him and did not find them, and that kind of slowed him down. And because of that, the investigators believe fewer people were killed or injured because of it.
Well, I know there's a lot of Marines and sailors that feel the same way. Your shots alerted them that there was danger. You broke the OODA loop of the attacker. You destabilized him. So I think there's a lot of folks that agree with those findings, yet The Navy at some point was considering taking some kind of disciplinary action against you. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. That's my understanding. And that's according to some kind of I was assigned to JAG officers, Judge Advocate General officers, which are like military lawyers,
Mhm.
and they were expecting and were told that I would be charged, and we were expecting to go to courts martial. But I think that the Navy did the right thing. I think they were definitely walking a tightrope because I did something that was, I think, courageous and praiseworthy. But at the same time, I did something that if all sailors, and not all sailors are may have the mindset that I do, right? As a
Sure,
as
sure.
a commanding officer, and so they it was difficult for them to know, do they praise me, do they punish me, and they didn't really do either, but they allowed me to continue my career and ended up promoting me to the next pay grade. The Navy allowed me to continue in my career and never forced me. I wasn't forced to retire at 20 years. I could have stayed in if I wanted to. So I think that I was prepared and expecting to go to court. I was expecting to, when I met my boss the next day on July 17th, I thought that he was going to relieve me of command right away, but he didn't. And for the first few days, I don't think that many people knew really how to treat me because they also assumed that I was going to be relieved, that I was going to go to courts martial, and there was a General Mills, who is the general over the Marine Corps Reserve. He was at one of our meetings, and I hadn't met him prior to that meeting, and it was immediately after the attack. We were trying to respond and recover, and he met me, asked me some questions, and I thought that was the end of my interaction with him. And then when we officially started the meeting, he stood up and he said, "This lieutenant commander here is a hero, and we've been treating him like he's a criminal. He saved lives. He did the right thing. He deserves our praise and admiration." And that really changed the environment for the better for me.
Yeah,
And
sure.
so thankful that he was willing to make those statements.
Plus, I mean, the Navy not only did they quote let you continue in your career, but you had another command, the command you
Yes.
retired from in Pensacola. They made you a CO again, and you had what we always talk about is the pinnacle of success, right? When you're in command, is having a change of command with a band,
Yes.
where where you go out on your terms and everybody's happy and it's not done in some office somewhere because you messed up. So clearly, the result that came from all this was really positive in terms of reflecting your leadership, reflecting your decision making and your rationale in gray areas. And one of the reasons I wanted to have you on this show is because many times leaders have to operate in gray areas, especially if they're in a field, and this could be a civilian field, a military field, even something in nonprofits that's expeditionary, somewhere that the rules have yet to be written. They're operating in a space where the old rules don't apply and things are different now, and they've got to be able to operate boldly in the gray space. So you've done this. Now, most of the people listening to this podcast are never going to face a terrorist attack, thankfully,
Mm-hmm.
but they will encounter times when the rules they routinely operate under seem obsolete or inadequate, leaving them without authority or operating space to be effective. From your perspective, what kind of advice do you have for leaders who face those kind of challenges?
I think that life would be a lot easier if more things were black and white. And I think sometimes if we're able to bend things and this is right, this is wrong, this is black, this is white, it would simplify. But so many things are nuanced, and as leaders, particularly, we have to navigate those nuanced situations and apply our experience, apply our leadership, apply our care for our fellow man, and come up with the best solution. And as you said, sometimes the rules are obsolete. Sometimes the rules aren't adequate for the situation that we find ourselves in. And sometimes the rules are wrong. And as a leader, personally, I cared more for my sailors and for their well-being than I cared for my career and for myself. And I think that's where we need to be as leaders, that we're not in love with our career or where we want to go professionally, that we're willing to put ourselves on the line for the sake of doing what's right. I'm glad that I can be used as an example for positive, but at the same time, I live with the thought of July 16th every day. I do have regrets. I wonder if I could have done more to preserve life. I wonder if I would have tried to re-engage the terrorist, if I could have stopped him from killing other people. And I had another magazine in my pocket, but I had to make the decision that seemed to be the best at the time. And unfortunately, we don't always know what would happen if we made a different choice. And that's why we have to be thoughtful about the choices that we make. And thankfully, I was kind of already thinking through what I would do if something were to happen, and I was able to practice those things through my mind. And I think that's another valuable lesson is think through some of those difficult decisions that you may have to make, and kind of chair fly, so to speak, what you're going to do. And that way you're not trying to come up with a solution on the fly when you're faced with those difficult circumstances.
There's some great reflections and advice, and I hear in you talking through that the selflessness that is at the center of true leadership. And so I appreciate you sharing that. I know that you have a lot of feelings that come flooding back when you share those stories, and you can tell when you're describing the incidents from your eyes. So I thank you for bringing us all into that for a period of time, helping us feel what you felt, and helping us kind of run through in our own minds how we would respond in similar situations, because that's what growing as a leader is all about. And now you've taken that experience that you had and you're doing something really positive about it, right? Talk to us a little bit about what you're doing now that you're officially retired with Tier Zulu.
Okay. Well, while I was still in the Navy, the tour after Chattanooga, I had time to really reflect on what happened on July 16th, and I started to get into a bad place. When we're exposed to a circumstance like this, that's traumatic, it takes time to process it, and sometimes we can process it in a way that may not be healthy. And I had the opportunity to meet a guy that was teaching anti-terrorism to commanding officers as a contractor to the Navy, and he actually taught the class after July 16th that I was required to go to. And he's now a really good friend of mine, and he had been asking some guys that were going through the training after I did that knew me. He said he would ask them how I'm doing, and he said, make sure you keep up with Tim, because it's important. He's probably suffering and processing these things, and we didn't need to make sure that he is in a good place. And when one of my good buddies told me that, I thought, wow, I need to just thank this guy that he would still think of me. And so I found him. I got to meet him again and thanked him, and kind of continued conversations with him over the years. And he's invited me to teach anti-terrorism and about terrorists and terrorism to commanding officers as a Navy contractor. And so I'm also offering that to other businesses and organizations, whether it's local government, state government, or churches, anybody that could, or a lot of people could benefit from thinking through these things and protecting their people, protecting their facilities, and just considering force protection. So that the company is Tier Zulu, and the website is tierzulu.com. And it's something I'm very passionate about. And I wish we didn't have to think about these things, but because of the world that we live in, we do. And it's important that we think through them as leaders so that we can preserve life and preserve property.
Well, when you look at that as your goal, it's tough to imagine a better person to be able to pull in to consult on doing that stuff than somebody who has the training, the background, and the unfortunate traumatic experience you've been through to help educate them. So we appreciate that. We also have the link to Tier Zulu on boldleader.com on this episode page. So we'll leave that up there for anybody who wants to check that out and come and have the benefit of tapping into your incredible expertise and experience in this space. Now, before we let you go too quick, I do want to give you a chance to brag on your family, because it is enormous. It's like its own softball team that you and your wife Renisha have created, and there's some other things you do with her as well, right? In terms of children's book publishing and your blog. Do you want to speak about that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So Renisha and I have been married for 20 years. We met at the Naval Academy. She's from the island of Saipan, and she's a delightful person. When people say that they like to meet me or like to talk to me, I think, well, you really need to meet my wife, because she's the treasure of the family. But we've been blessed with 10 children. She just gave birth to our youngest 2 weeks ago today on July 20th. Thank you. So he's 2 weeks old, and our oldest is turning 19 next week. And we've got 4 girls and 6 boys. And I like to tell people that it's always a party at our house. But my wife has written and self-illustrated some children's books, and she's working on some children's books with our daughters also. And we have a publishing company called Wholesome Press that we publish our books through, and then a website that we try to kind of be virtual mentors for parents and for husbands and wives. And that website is Tim and Renisha. Yeah. We like to write together.
Gotcha. And we've got a link to Tim and Renisha on boldleader.com on the episode page, as well as a link to Wholesome Press and the illustrations in those books that are featured on the site. They're beautiful, beautiful illustrations. So obviously, Renisha is a very talented lady. So
yes.
And congratulations on the birth of your 10th.
Thank you.
You're beyond the softball team now.
Yes.
You're almost fielding a football team. This is pretty incredible.
Working on it.
I've mentioned it earlier in the recording, but I'll mention it now. This episode and this posting are dedicated to the 4 Marines and the sailor that were lost as a result of that attack, and it's dedicated to them in memoriam.
Yeah, absolutely. TD, thank you for the opportunity to join you today and to talk about these things. I want to remember Petty Officer Smith, Gunny Sullivan, Staff Sergeant Wyatt, Sergeant Holmquist, and Lance Corporal Wells and their families. They were heroes. Oftentimes we remember the service members and then forget their families that either they left behind or that are behind when they're off serving. And I want to also remember the sacrifice that their families have made, because they're living on and remembering those heroes. So thank you for the opportunity to join you today and talk about these things and to honor those heroes and their hero families.
Thanks for listening in to this episode of No Cliches. For visual stuff like links, texts, and pics, visit aboldleader.com and look for the banner at the top of the page. I'd also like to know what you think. You can leave a voice message at anchor.fm/aboldleader or a written one at aboldleader.com. I'm TD Smyers, and I look forward to having you back.